So tonight, WordPress Dissected, a bit of a weird title, but I was in a weird mood. I've been using a lot of ChatGTP. This is the DALL-E stuff. I'm not sure if I like it too much. It's too cartoony, I think. So I played with Midjourney for quite a while, and going down to DALL-E seems as if you're up and down a little bit, but there it is. So this is meant to be a WordPress land on all the bits and components of WordPress. At least that's what it said. I have no idea, but it just looked nice. So, okay, let's jump into it. What the purpose of this is to try and give you a kind of overview of what WordPress is from a kind of backend, stack, components, ideas point of view. It's a bit like being a mechanic and somebody comes up with a car, and asks you that something's wrong with the car, and you know what's under the hood. You've got an engine, it's all connected to these parts. So the mechanic knows they can identify issues. If you understand what WordPress is underneath, that should help you to understand WordPress a little bit better, especially if you've got problems or if you've got clients coming to you as well. You've got a little bit of ideas to how it's all kind of fits together. Very briefly, a bit about history of WordPress and its evolution. I think it's important to understand where it came from, where it's going to. So WordPress timeline, 2003. That's when WordPress started. It was forked, which just means copied, fancy word for copied, from something called B2 Cafilog by Matt Mullenweg and Mike Little. And it was basically a blogging platform. So it was copied as a blogging platform. Between 2005 and 2008, it kind of grew and expanded. So we got core auto updates. So you didn't download a zip file anymore, just press the button and it updated, which was miles ahead of any other system that was out there. We got widgets, shortcodes, and plugins. So it really did expand out from just being a simple blogging tool to being something more useful. Then we've got 2010 to 11, which is called the CMS era. And this is when the business started to really adopt WordPress. We get custom post types in this. I got a little bit of a change. This is where WordPress becomes kind of fully featured. You can do anything with WordPress, not just you can have library books and whatever types of post types in there. Next one, it was what we call the modern WordPress era. It's not my name, it's just what it's called. I don't know why. But 2013 to 2016, we get a new design of the interface. Customizer comes in and get improvements. Now we're looking at responsiveness for that. And more important, from a developer point of view, we get the REST API. I'm more about that a little bit later. But it really shifts WordPress away from just being a business info website to being a more useful tool that can integrate into other systems. The next one, 2018 to 2023, last year, is the Gutenberg or blocks era. So here we see a new direction that Automatic and Matt Mullenweg has taken. They call it the Gutenberg project, which is 4 big phases. Phase 1 was the block editor, which was released in version 5. Phase 2, it was full site editing. Not just update pages, posts, but update your header and footer and all the other things within WordPress. And that continues on just now. But as of this year, it kicks off phase 3, which is real-time collaboration inside WordPress. And then phase 4, there's no timeline for that, but phase 4 is multilingual in core. It's like true multilingual between everything across the site. So that gives you an idea of where WordPress has come from, a humble blogging system, all the way up to where it is just now. To so I've got a question for you. If you had a phase 5, if you were in charge of phase 5, what would it be? What would you do? Mullenweg came up and says, dude, I want you to run phase 5. What would you put in WordPress?
Integrate with AI.
AI, good one. Very topical.
Redo the plugin store to be more like the App Store and Google Play Store.
Nice. Anyone else?
We like to have a CSS framework, something that's specific to WordPress. So when you install different plugins, they
Behave.
right, they just said, hey, let's have a CSS.
I don't have a slide, but the one where AI, for people, somebody on Twitter asked if you had phase 5, what would you do? Top one was AI, and create AI. The second one was the media library for that. And the third one was a better developer framework. So as in redesign WordPress to be more friendly in the back end. Those are the top 3. Yeah. Okay, let's get into WordPress server stack. Let's start here. So WordPress is a PHP. PHP is a programming language. It's an app. You think of WordPress as an app, and it sits on top of this stack. So at the bottom, we've got the server, which is operating system, which is usually Linux. Next up, we've got the web server. So the web server is used to spin out HTML, but it also runs PHP on top as well. So it converts the PHP templates to HTML. And WordPress uses heavily a database server. So most of the content that's not files, like images or CSS or JavaScript, is stored in the database. So in general, when you talk about WordPress server stack, that's kind of it. So operating system, web server, database server, and PHP. That's the kind of core technology of the stack. Sometimes you'll find names like LAMP, which means Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, or LEMP, which is Nginx. I don't know what, because you can't pronounce them, so they use an E. But basically, these are interchangeable. So Apache or Nginx kind of do roughly the same job as a web server. But that's the server stack there. If you're asking about Apache version Nginx, some pros for Apache: it's mature, it's stable, it's been around the block, completely compatible. It's got heaps of modules, so it's totally flexible to do pretty much whatever you want. It has some performance issues if you want to scale up. It handles fewer requests than the other guy, and it's got complexity in scaling because it's a big thing. Whereas Nginx, it's a modern architecture, so it's been built for modern web designs. Therefore, it's more performant, it's more efficient. It handles more requests than Apache. It also has a couple of things. It's faster at static content delivery, so that's spitting out HTML pages. That's what it loves to do. And images and assets. Also, you can use it as a reverse proxy, which is basically you have another machine server in front of the web server. So you can do things like, get rid of spams and intercept DDoS and things like that, which you can't use Apache for. Cons are, it's a higher learning curve because it's new, and there's some compatibility issues. But basically, we're so happily on either of those. And if you're installing a web hosting, you'll probably get one or two, or maybe a combination of them on there. There are other server stacks as well. So Windows, so it's called WAMP, which is Windows Information Server. And then you'll see Apache or Nginx, MySQL, PHP are like the common elements between them all. But yeah, Windows IS, you can get a few issues with that. I had a client running their WordPress website on Windows IS and they always had file permission errors or something would happen because Windows handles file permissions very differently than Linux. It doesn't have this concept of different ownerships for those. You can run on Amazon, and there's different types of Amazon services. There's EC2, which is a server. There's Lightsail, which is a type of configured server. There's Bitnami, which is like a delivery service for those. It's a bit complex and a bit manual to set up those for Amazon, so new people tend to shy away from that. The same with Azure, which is a Windows cloud system. You install WordPress as part of their app service. And again, it's a little bit more complex than a normal host would set up. And similar with Google Cloud on their compute engine as well. It actually requires a separate plugin so it can actually talk to the Google servers at the back end. There's a couple of things you can do with the stack. You can replace Apache with Lite TTB, which is just a smaller version of a web server. If you don't need all the big modules that Apache has, you just want it to serve, just simple requests, you can pop that one in and save yourself resources for that. And quite often, people replace the database server, which is usually MySQL, with something called MariaDB. It's exactly the same as MySQL, but slightly better because it's not owned by Oracle, or is it IBM now? I can't remember who owns MySQL. Yeah, one of those big ones. MySQL is very slow to get new features, whereas MariaDB is independent and keeps up with trends. That's the server stack. It's important to kind of know where WordPress sits and how it all works for those. WordPress a bit closer, the WordPress app. When you're talking about database, usually when you install WordPress, all the tables on the database have what they call a prefix. It's usually WP_. And we'll show you where that's stored. you're looking at the WordPress tables, it's usually WP underscore and then this, that, this, that, but it might not be. So some hosts in the past have changed this prefix to something else to try and stop hackers from, guessing what they makes no difference really. And then, so you might see tables that have got something else prefixed other than WP underscore, but that's the default that comes with WordPress, so that's probably what you'll see. There are 12 core database tables. Here they are, WP underscore comments, or comments. And then you'll see some database tables as the same, but it's got the word meta. So comments is where it stores the main comments data, so the title, your name, website URL, and the comment. And then a meta table is an extra table that holds additional information you could add to comments, things like custom fields or things like that. So they're kept a little bit separate. WP links used to be used for something called a blog row, which is way, way, way back when WordPress was like a blogging thing. It's not really used anymore, but it does install it for legacy purposes, but you can quite safely delete it. And then WP underscore options, that's got all your global settings for WordPress. So the WordPress settings, it's got your plugin settings as well, some theme settings as well that are not in the customizer. So most of your site options are in the WP options table. Then you've got all your post stuff. Everything WordPress is a post. A page is a post. I know it's confusing, but a page is just a post of type page. So WP post has all your post data. So that's your date, your title, your slug, your author, content itself, that sort of stuff. And then post meta, similar to the content meta, is additional stuff that you could add into a post. Things like custom fields, additional attributes for those. These four tables, WP terms, term meta, term taxonomy, and term relationships, they deal with your categories and tags. They're called taxonomies. When Matt Mullenweg came over here in 2014 and went to the pub afterwards, and I said to him, asked him, if there's one thing you could rewrite for WordPress, what would it be? And he says this. He says it's all messy. So if you want to understand WordPress and the way that category tags works, it's probably the hardest thing to understand, because you've got your terms, you've got your term meta, which is additional stuff you can put on. But then the way that the terms and categories are linked together is between those, are in those two tables. It's really difficult to kind of filter itself out. So probably the most difficult thing to understand about WordPress at a low level is how the terms and categories work and where they're stored and how they relate to each other. So good luck if you want to go down that route. I had to go down that route with a client, and it's not nice. The last two ones are for users. So WP underscore users is your core user information. So the usernames, passwords, it's not the password, it's a hash of a password. And then the meta is just all the additional information that you could add, like custom fields. Does everyone understand what I mean by hash? So, yeah. So it's not the actual password that's stored. They get the password, you make a hash of it, you store that in, and then you compare it afterwards. So something that Tangerine should have done. I'll get off my soapbox. This is what you might see. So there's a couple of tools for managing databases. There's Adminer, PHP Adminer, and there's PHP My Admin, which you'll probably find on a host environment. So that's kind of what it'll look like when you go into the database server and see all the tables there. That's the 12 tables. So it's not too scary, really, apart from the taxonomy stuff. It's all fairly simple. You can find out where all the stuff sits in a database table.
So I never thought about the WP posts.
Yeah.
So because obviously it's also pages. So how does the system differentiate between page and a post, even though it's all?
Yeah. If you go into WP posts and have a look, there'll be a type, a post type. It's actually called post underscore type, and that tells you that post. It can be a page. It can be a draft, an attachment, product. So it's of post type. That's how. Okay, let's move on to the configuration file. Probably the most important file for WordPress, and certainly something you need to go into if you're mucking around with how WordPress is set up, or if you're moving WordPress. It's right in the root of your file system. So wherever you've installed WordPress, this is where it will be, right at the top level of your directory. It has most importantly the database connection details. So Yes, sorry, I'll make them all available on Meetup and the Facebook group. Yeah, yeah. So because WordPress stores a lot of its data in the database, it needs to be able to connect to the database. So the database connection details are in this file. So if you see error, can't connect to database server, this is the file you need to go in and change those. So it's database name, it needs a user and a password, and it needs a host or an IP address in order to contact the database server, which is usually on the same machine, but might not be. There's things called authentication keys and salts. It's a big block of stuff, of gobbledygook letters that go along for about 6 or 7 lines. It uses these for hashing and for sessions as well, which I'll talk about a little bit later. If you're installing WordPress, it has a default key and salt block, and then there's a link above it in the comments that you can go and visit to generate a new one. I'd always suggest that if you're installing WordPress, always generate a new block of keys, because it's one additional step for security that you can do. It stores a database table prefix, so that WP underscore or something else, and it allows you to change the debug mode. It's usually off by default, but you can turn it on in the config file. So that's roughly what's there when you install WordPress out of the box, but it can be used for so much more. You can do things like auto-update modes, so you can tell WordPress to update everything, you know, every minor little point release update, or you can say, look, I don't want it to update at all, just turn it all off, and it'll ignore updates. Number of revisions, one of the things that I change all the time when I install WordPress. So by default out of the box, it saves everything, you know, every single revision. I usually change that to maybe 5 or 3, just to have a little bit of backup. Otherwise, after 4 or 5 years, your database is huge with all these revisions. You can change the autosave interval as well. If you like for editing websites, publishing websites, people will increase this. If you're not typing a lot, if you're not making a lot of posts, you might not bother with that at all. You can change the location of the uploads, content, plugin, and theme folder as well. So you might want to change that for a little bit of security, or you might have WordPress installed with a different file structure, but it allows you to do that within this configuration file. You can change the site and blog URL, which is quite useful if you're moving WordPress, or if there's something wrong with like between a staging site and the main site. You can actually go in there and tell it to override your settings, and it will just pick up on that in the configuration file. You can change PHP memory limits. You can disable the editors, you know, the theme and plugin editors. You can change those, disable those as well.
Yeah, in regards to memory limits,
yeah.
So I think there is a conflict with the hosting. So the
yeah.
hosting server, they have its own memory limits.
Yeah.
If my memory limit set in the PHP, so
yeah.
it's maybe higher than the hosting, so it does not work.
Yeah, yeah. It depends on your hosting. You're right. If you've got your own VPS, virtual private server, you can tell PHP through this what to allocate to WordPress, but within PHP configuration file, you can set a limit as well. Or if you're on a hosting that's, for example, I think you mentioned GoDaddy, things like that, they have a box limit that you can't go above. So you could go into wp-config and say, I want to set it to 1 gigabyte, you know, but people override that in their system, say, no, you can't go above X, Y, Z. So if it allows you, you can set the PHP memory limit through this, but it might be restricted by the PHP settings itself for the host. So yeah, so there's heaps of stuff you do with wp-config. There's links at the bottom, the purpley thing. They'll tell you lots more stuff that you can do, but really important file. Let's have a look at the file structure for WordPress out the box. So this is before you go tinkering with locations. The main folders is wp-admin. So that contains all your admin dashboard files. And it also contains the admin-ajax.php. Ajax is a way of, rather than do a page refresh, it allows the client to ask the server for some information, and the server will send, and you can update the page without doing a complete refresh. So that particular file is in there. So a lot of systems use that. WooCommerce uses it for carts and things like add to cart, things like that. It's a bit of a pain it being in there, because it means you can't restrict your WP admin folder to a particular IP address, because it always has to access that file. But that's where all the dashboard stuff is. The vast majority of the WordPress core files is in the wp-includes. So everything that's not dashboard, everything that is WordPress is in the WP includes folder. So between the two of them, that's basically where WordPress lives in all its files. Then you've got WP content. So that's a directory for us, WordPress users, for devs, designers to play around with. And it contains your themes, which are all your theme files. So that's your 2020 files and your custom themes that you've installed. Plugins, so all installed plugins, even if they're inactive, they'll be in there within their own directory. And then uploads directory, which is where all your content that you add to the library, media library, lives. And that's usually ordered in by year and month. So it'll be 2024 and then 01, 02, 03, all the way up to 12. So those are the core folders. You might find some other ones like upgrade and things like that, but they're not necessary. You can delete them in WordPress or recreate them. These are the core ones that are really needed for WordPress to open. Important files, we just talked about the wp-config. If you see a slash at the beginning, that means it's at the top level directory, so you always find that at the top level. There's other ones, important ones. You might find a .ht access, so that's for just Apache servers, and it controls permalinks and redirections for things. So to have your nice fancy name, there'll be the .ht access for Apache. There will be a .index.php. And this is where WordPress routes through all its URLs. It bootstraps WordPress. It starts up with WordPress, and we'll have a look at the page loading sequence a little bit for those. But very important that it's there. And then you've got your wp-load.php, and that's the file that actually loads the WordPress environment, all the files, and starts bringing in all the template files from wp-include. You might also come across an index.php inside other folders. And if you open up, it's got 2 lines. And this is to try and prevent somebody going into a folder in the URL, and it's showing a list of all the files there. It's called directory listing. It's usually turned off in web servers, but if it's turned on, then someone can type in a URL path to a folder, and it'll list all the files in there, which is pretty bad from a security point of view. So that's why this is usually included everywhere. So when the folder tries to open it, it just doesn't output anything. That's all. So those are the important files to look out for. This is how WordPress Bootstrap loads up. So this is what happens every time you request something from WordPress. So it starts with a URL request. That could be to the homepage. It could be to the wp-admin. It could be to an image file, anywhere, or your about page. So that request comes in from somebody typing. The core WordPress loads in. Then it loads in plugins. Then it sets up WordPress. Then it has a closer look at the URL to see exactly what it should be doing. It loads whatever template it needs. It then has a look at hooks and filters, then outputs the final HTML. So that's the basic sequence, what happens every time someone types in a URL. Let's have a little bit of a closer look at what's happening. So one is just the URL that someone's typed in. Core loading. So it loads into the wp-config.php. That's the first file it loads in. Well, apart from index, but that's the first one it loads in. And that then gives you access to the database server and global settings. Then it loads in wp-load.php, which then loads in the wp-settings.php scripts, and that starts installing WordPress, loading up all the libraries from WP includes, and really kind of getting the WordPress app up and running. The next part, the plugins and themes. We load in all the active plugins. So all the active plugins are loaded. It has a look in the directory. It loads up their boot file for those. And then it looks in the theme, and it loads your functions.php file from the active theme in there as well. The reason it does this is because plugins and your functions can alter the way that WordPress then continues. So they might have things in them, and we'll look at that in a minute, that will change the way that the WordPress environment is set up. The next part, setup environment, it sets up a WordPress object, which is the main query object for WordPress, and it initializes the main WordPress loop. The WordPress loop is the way that WordPress gets the main content and it builds up the page. It needs to be displayed. It then has a closer look at the URL. So you've done the core part, but you might be on /about or /services, or it might be an archive, a tag or category. So WordPress needs to know what type of template files to load in. So it parses the URL and sees exactly what it's meant to be loading in. And then based on the query, it then goes and selects appropriate template files from the template hierarchy, which we'll look at in a second, so that it can render the proper page out to the browser. But before it does that, it looks at hooks and filters, action hooks and filters. These are ways to change what WordPress outputs to a browser. I'll go through that in a little bit. And then finally, it outputs the HTML. So quite a process involved if you break it down. So what WordPress is doing on every single time you type an URL. But some important stuff here, and you can start to see how WordPress builds up and uses all the different components. Okay, let's talk about sessions. Sessions are important. I tried to break it down as an example. What are sessions? Think about it as your local coffee shop, your barista, or a local shop that you go into. Walk in there and they say, "Hi, Will. How you doing? Hi, Sam. How's your pet? You said it was an accident last month. Do you want your reg?" So they're retaining this little bit of data that they know who you are, and then they can respond, accordingly with information. So that's roughly what sessions are. Sessions are a way for WordPress to remember who you are and what you do, basically. And we need that because WordPress is what's called stateless. So when we had looked through that page opening cycle, it does that for every URL in our WordPress website, whether it's the About page or Services page. It doesn't know who you are at all. It goes through all that information not knowing exactly who you are. But with WordPress, we log in and do stuff as an editor. So it needs to have some way of identifying who you are. It doesn't do it by default. This is where sessions come in. So as well as all that page loading events, it also reads in some session data as well, if it exists. And that's handled by a cookie. So the cookie is a small bit of information that's on your browser, and that's roughly like the bit of information that's in your barista's head, that they remember who you are, what your favorite coffee was, and stuff like that. This is how WordPress remembers who we are when we log in. Otherwise, it would just keep asking you who you are and what you're here for each time you do a page refresh. So we need this little bit of information stored that WordPress can remember exactly who you are. So the cookie data is stored in your local web browser, not in the database. Some people think it's on the database, it's not. And this little bit of cookie data, if it's on your machine, is read on each page load, that cycle that we went through. It contains the user ID or a hash of the user ID and an authentication token. So no passwords are stored in there. It's always hash stuff. And hashes are created using that authentication and salt keys in wp-config.php. This is why it's a good idea to change that in the config file, because you don't want the default stuff, because then someone could guess, or at least has another process of how to create a hash. So they theoretically could try and match the same hash for your password. So it's always a good idea to change that block, so it's completely unique to your site. There's 3 cookies that WordPress stores. There's a WordPress hash, which is display name, session ID. There's the second one there, which is your logged in time, and it's the session expiry, so it just gives it a little bit of time. So if you don't log in for a couple of days, it just deletes it and creates a new one. So your information isn't there permanently. And there's a few settings that it stores, things like your layout of your widgets on your dashboard and things like that. It kind of remembers that bit of data. So not a lot of information, but enough so that when after you log in the next refresh, the next page you go to, it looks at that, it knows who you are, it knows you got a session, and it just logs you in and keeps you in there. So if that wasn't there, every time you try to access it, it would come up with a login. So this is why we need sessions and cookie data. Okay, SQL. So because WordPress has most of its content in the database, we need a way of getting information out of the database and into the database. It's called SQL, so structured query language, basically just a database communication language for that. It's used to, there's 4 methods in getting the data. So you can retrieve, so that's get. You can put information in, like new information. You can update information that's in the database, or you can just delete it altogether. So those 4 actions in SQL language are select, insert into, update, and delete. So if you are going into the backend language, going to templates, you'll probably start to see this sort of information in the templates if you're going to dig around. WordPress kind of abstracts that, or puts a layer over the top of SQL language, and it's called a WPDB PHP class. You can still use raw SQL queries, but it manages the job for you. So you don't have to use SQL all the time. So here's an example of getting data. So you've got your WordPress WPDB class, and then the little arrow, which means it's a method. So get results, and you've got your query in there. And here's a little bit of example further. So you're making that a global class, which means you get access to it in your script, in your PHP. You want to store the stuff in a variable called results, and then you're using the class name, WPDB, and then you're using the method get results, and there's a little bit of SQL in there. So what's that saying? It's saying select star, which is everything from the WP_options table. I'm going to use this little bit here. This method here actually reads the wp-config file and sees what the table prefix is. So you get a lot of developers will just assume that that's WP_, and then it breaks if someone's used a different table prefix. But that ensures you get the right one. And then where option ID equals 1. So that's basically saying, give me back the first option in the WP-options table, and return it as an object.
Yeah. Where the prefix store in the database,
Yeah. Yeah. So that function there, the wp-config.php file, and the variable in there that says database prefix. Yeah. So you'll get a lot of developers who'll assume it's just WP_, and they'll write in their code WP_ in the code. And if someone changes it, then that's another reason why it could be a PHP error. You get white screen of death because someone's assumed that it's something they've not read the proper. Okay. So just a little bit example of how you get information into and out of the database server. That was quite a lot. So I've got a picture of a cute cat, because I can see some people are like, whoa. So that's a bit of a deep dive into some of the core methods that WordPress uses to kind of boot up and to remember people and to kind of operate. So that's probably more than most people will go into for WordPress. But I think it's important to know how it works under the hood, because then you've got an idea of exactly what's going on when something happens, or when you get a client project that comes up. You can say, okay, right, we're in this page just now. Okay, this is what WordPress is doing. So take a breather. I'm gonna sip some water. There's more. Okay, say goodbye to the kitty. Okay, let's move into some meat. So we talked about when WordPress is loading a page, it goes through all these steps, and at some point it has to choose how to output stuff to the web browser. So how does it know what it's doing? So it has a look at the URL, and it tries to determine exactly what it's meant to be outputting. So is it a /category? Is it /tag? Is it a page? Is it a post? Is it a blog post list? Is it a static page? What's going on here? So welcome to the WordPress template hierarchy. So it's a bit scary to look at first, but sorry?
Pretty.
It's pretty, yeah. But let me go through some of it to make you understand what's going on. So we read it from left to right, as you would normally. So depending on where the URL is coming from, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, got 6 options that WordPress could choose. Okay. /category /tag. Is it a singular page, like an about page or a services page? Is it your static front page? Is it your index page, page with all your posts on it? Is it an error page? No idea where the URL is, or this page. So depending on those options, moves to see if there's an equivalent there. So an example, if it is an error, if you type in blah, 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 on your website, then it goes all the way to something called a 4.php. If it exists in a theme file, that allows you to style the way that WordPress presents the 404 to say, oh no, the file's not here, or have some sort of funny page. If that doesn't exist, it goes to the index.php files. You see everything ends up in the index.php. And that means there's no template there, and it's just the server will respond to say 404 error. That's all you get. So WordPress gives the theme designers a way to template that particular response. And if that's not there, it just defaults to whatever the web server will spit out if it's not, if it's a 404 page. And that's similar to search. So you can have a search.php, so it tailors the way that WordPress shows the search page. Otherwise, you'll get the default web server response to that. Slightly different for looking on your front page of your website. It has to look for home.php. And if you've got that in your theme file, it allows you to style the way that your blogs are showing out. Now, there's two options for a front page in WordPress. Your blogs, which is the default, so it shows all your blog postings, or you can have a static front page, which most business websites use. And you can even actually go through, they go through to the very same home.php, because at the end of the day, that's the front page of your website. Okay. But if you've got a static page, you have two. You can pop templates in your theme page.php, which is different from blog lists. And that down or blog this. You have the option to have that in front of this. Otherwise, if it is kind of works, it's what type of request does developer. You can then break it down into all these templates, so all these different stages that allows you to custom the design of the template and output exactly what you need and where you need it. So these are primary templates. These ones here, I know it's the colors. This is what's called template. It's not neat. These are variable templates. Some variable ones. Or those, so you can put them in your theme file, and so you can really, if you just want to have one particular tag to be themed differently, you can have a file for that in your template. So it looks a bit of a mess, but when you read it from left to right, and you consider what WordPress is trying to render and output, it kind of makes sense. That's how your templates are built up. So if you look at 2022, 2021, 2020, you'll see some of these files in there. You'll see like category dash something or front dash page.php. So that's what they're doing depending on what type of request is coming in. Yep.
With the new block things, are they still retaining that structure?
Yep.
Or are they moving away from it?
Mm-hmm. I'll go into more detail next month, but both classic themes and block themes have the same template hierarchy. The only real difference, and I'm really generalizing here, is that the classic ones end in .php and your new block themes end in .html. But same hierarchy, same way of rendering out stuff. There's a theme handbook at that URL, and it tells you a lot more detail into exactly what that image goes into. And again, all the slides will be up on Meetup, so you can get those links. Hooks, actions, and filters. We talked about that in the page cycle. So when WordPress is loading stuff, there's an option near the end for something called hooks. Let's see exactly what they do. Again, I tried to simplify this. So if you think about the WordPress page and the WordPress core app as like an orchestra or a symphony. So the WordPress core app is all your musicians there. They don't change. But then you have a conductor and you have the director. Okay? So the director can create all the scores. So he basically composes the music that runs along. So you can think about that as your different themes and your plugins all in there. And the conductor allows the music to flow. He makes the all flow around, but he has control of changing some things slightly as well. So if someone's missing a beat, he'll tell them to go a bit faster. He can change the rhythm up and down. Okay, this is where hooks and filters come in. They're the director and the conductor of WordPress. And the WordPress core, the components, they stay the same. That's the orchestra. Okay, so they never change, but the director can then add in different blocks. You know, he can get the tuba guys, he can do the brass to do something. So it's him to creating the website with all the different components. And the conductor he's allowed a little creativity in how the music is then produced. And that's your hooks and filters there. And I'll show you how that works. Maybe it's a bad analogy, but that's the only one I could really come up with. So how do they work? There's something called a hook event. It's a name in WordPress. And then you can, this is why it's called hook, you can hook or associate your code with that particular event. Here's an example. I've got a function here. It's called modify post. It gets as an input some post data. I'm basically saying if the post ID is 164, do something, and then return the post object back. And here's how we hook our code in. So this event that we want our code to run is called the post. And that runs when WordPress is looking through the loop and it's getting the post data out there. And then I'm associating or hooking my function called modify post in. So whenever WordPress goes through that page load, when it comes to that particular event, then it'll run my bit of code. So again, a very simplified version of this cycle. These are events like plugins loaded. Then we do the loop, which this event fires, and then it'll run my code, and then it'll go on to do the rest of the stuff it needs to, and then render the page out. There's two types of hooks. One's called action. It runs a code block like this. You have optional access to an input parameter. So you'd have to look at your codex to see what the parameters are. In this instance, I'm using the save post as the hook event name. And I'm hooking my function, which is called my save post. And I get, because if I look at the handbook on the codex, it tells me that there's two input parameters. It's called post ID and post. So that allows me within my function to say, if post ID is number 99, then output to the error log, blah, blah, blah. You know, this post has been saved. An example there. So when WordPress is going through its page load, and it gets to the save post hook, it runs my block of code. This thing happens, and that's it. And then WordPress just continues on with its journey. Okay? And that's what actions are. It allows you to run a block of code, and your block of code does your block of code, and that's it. WordPress continues.
Yeah, what's the save post? Save underscore post. Yeah, what's that? Is it event or?
It's an event, yeah. If you're in the editor, you make a change, you press save post, that little event will fire. So it allows you to hook a bit of code in. So just say you wanted to do something while you're saving a post in WordPress, it allows you to do something else for this.
So are those events fixed?
Yep.
Or we can customize, or they're fixed?
The names are fixed
Names.
within the WordPress core, but plugins and themes also come with their own actions and filters. Or the developer can create your own as well.
Yeah, but the function my save post is the
That's my one.
yeah the filter.
Well, this one's called an action, and we'll see what a filter is. Okay, so the action just does this. It doesn't return anything back to the WordPress page loading process. The second type is a filter. So it's exactly the same as an action, except something, modifying the data and returning it back to WordPress. Okay, so the difference between the first one is it just runs a block of code and you go and do something, and then the information that you get in hasn't changed. It stays the same, and WordPress does the same thing when it's loading in. Whereas with filters, it allows you to change the data on the WordPress journey to rendering the page. Okay, so in this one here, I'm actually changing the post title and return that back to WordPress so that then when WordPress starts to render the page, it's got a new page title. Whereas the action doesn't. It has, once it does the action, it stops, and then WordPress goes on with the old information or the same information. Whereas filters allow you to change the output. And so it gets to that stage, you get some data, you go, oh, actually, I want to modify it and change it and expand it, and there you go, WordPress. And it continues on its journey with that new information. Okay. So they're very powerful ways of changing and then adding to WordPress. And they're used extensively throughout WordPress core and the plugins and themes to modify and do stuff. This is how plugins basically work. You know, if you've got WooCommerce installed, and maybe you want to change the emails that it sends out, and there's a little plugin that you install. You plug in install, and then you get on a dashboard, you get to change the way that emails. This is what it's using. So the plugin will then, when it finds a particular event, it will then hook the plugin's code into where WordPress is rendering all this stuff. So this is how WordPress plugins basically work. They use these two systems to change the way that WordPress is outputting information.
Just one example to understand that more. So if you go back, sorry, Will.
Yeah, all good.
If you go back to your filter for a second, imagine that I have a post and I want to retrieve some extra information called read time. How long does it take for me to read this page? Okay. In that case, I'd save the post. I'm going to use modify post. What I want to point out, you see modify post, it says add action to the post. So whenever a post is being picked up, so remember everything in WordPress is a post. So I'll grab the page and then modify post. See how it's the same as the function name up the top? They're both the same. So I was getting that post, and then we're going to say post read time equals 1 minute. And then I add it. Now what's happened is my page has added onto it my extra 1 minute time. See what I mean? That's a filter because it's being handed back to the page.
Yeah, so the post has been changed.
Yep.
It's being filtered. That's right. We call it filtering, but it's having an extra piece of information added onto it for us that we've customized for ourselves called read time. And if we go to the next one, which is an action, this one here, let's imagine that I've got a background task and it's going to go and center something in the background. Let's calculate how many characters of information I've got on this page and create a read time and store it somewhere in my database behind the scenes. So it's not going to return because when I save my post, I've got my page of content, it's 5,000 words, I've clicked save, and when the save post happens, the background says, this post ID, I'll count my characters up and run it through something to update the read time. That's happening behind the scenes, it's not returned to the page. So that's what we call an action. And again, you see save post, goes to my save post. See how the function says my save post? So we're really the same. Every time the save post thing happens, I can add as many extra bits of code onto that as I like to perform all sorts of stuff. That's how that works. That kind of clarified a bit.
Yeah, for the filter one. So do you have the original value for the post? Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. And then you
That's
can,
what you pass it in the first thing.
and then you can change it.
Yeah, but you change value. Does not add value to the.
Yeah, you can add, change or subtract. This is what filters allow you to do. Allow you to modify all the data.
But it's outputted
Give it
into
back.
the page. You're generally not putting something in the database.
Yeah.
Isn't that right, Will? So generally an action would put something into the database, a filter puts something onto the page.
The custom page
Yeah.
loading.
That's right.
Oh, it's not stored in the database.
Generally not.
It could do. It could do, yeah.
More advancements.
And then the last two bits, you'll see those two numbers at the end. So the number 11 there, that's called a priority. So WordPress uses all these hooks within its core system all the time, within the WordPress core. They're actually default to number 10. So WordPress uses its own actions and filters at priority level 10, which means if you want yours to run before WordPress, you set it to a lower priority, for example, 8 or 9, and your function will run before the WordPress function does. If you want it to run after WordPress, you want WordPress to do its thing first and then modify that data, you set the priority level above. So for example, I think in WooCommerce, all their actions and filters are usually set at number 12, which means that WordPress runs its stuff first, and then WooCommerce does its thing. But if you want to modify the code between what WordPress has done and before WooCommerce does it, you set yours to set 11. So what? Yeah. But so WordPress runs something that allows you to run something next, and then you can see it. So that's a priority level of when your code runs. And then the last one is the number of inputs that you're allowed for those. It will tell you for those, and that's dependent on what the hook is. So a crucial way of understanding exactly how WordPress works is hooks and filters. Get your head around those, and you'll be smarter than 90% of every other developer that doesn't understand how this works, or theme designer. Let's move on because it's almost 1:15. So almost at the end, custom post types and taxonomies. We talked about everything WordPress is a post, which is it's just a post with a type. But WordPress also allows you to extend those particular types of posts. So you can think about the clones. You had the original Stormtrooper, and now if you watch, the series and film number 10 or whatever it is, or Solo, you've got all these different clones with stripes and different markings on them. So whereas WordPress originally had posts and pages, Now you've got products and portfolios. You can extend WordPress wherever it is. We've got taxonomy, so fancy category tags. We have categorizing something. And again, the same thing with the Stormtroopers. You can then extend that and have any particular category or tag type associated with a custom post type. And the best way to explain that is with WooCommerce, because everyone's kind of familiar with that. So when you install WooCommerce, it installs a custom post type, or CPT, is what they call it, or CTAX, or custom taxonomy. So when you install WooCommerce, you get a new custom post type called product, which wasn't there before. So post page, and now you've got product. And then it associates a custom taxonomy to those, which is product category, product tag, variation, visibility, which is separate from your posts category and tags, okay, which will only work with posts. Now, product category and product tag only work with products, so you've associated a new category. Similarly, there's a post type called shop order, and again, it's got custom taxonomy, status, and refunds. And there's two other custom post types called shop coupon and shop webhook. But you can see the way that the custom works to extend WordPress, what it normally is, which is just posts and pages. So if you install a gallery plugin, you might see like a gallery thing, or if you install a portfolio plugin, you might see clients stuff, and then you'll be ways to search it. So yeah, post types and extending WordPress.
Yeah, but what's the webhook? The shop webhook?
A webhook is a way to send data on a particular event out to somewhere else. So for example, if somebody buys a product, there'll be a webhook that allows you to send that product data, the amount, the customer details to another system, Zapier, or your account system. Okay. Yeah. There's three basic ways, there's obviously more, but there's three basic ways I thought of creating customized post types, if that's something that you're interested in. One is manually, of course. You can either use a code snippet or your theme functions.php, or write a custom plugin. And again, this tells you, the link down there is more about how to do that. But two easier ways. One is advanced custom fields. It comes with post types and taxonomies, so it allows you to create them without having to do any code. And there's a plugin called Pods, which does the same. So it's your user interface. It just allows you to type in what the post type is, select some options, and then you can manage the custom taxonomies as well with those. So a good couple of things to look at if you're looking to extend WordPress that way. REST API. REST API allows you to connect WordPress into everything. Whereas before, WordPress stood alone. Once it had a REST API, now you can actually have WordPress in the middle of stuff and moving information too. A REST API, it allows you to read and write data from WordPress and to WordPress. So read and write without having to use WordPress, basically. It allows for things like, you might have heard the word headless WordPress. So that's using WordPress as a back end privately to store all your information, putting a separate website to pull the information out, and rather than using the WordPress app, you've got a separate app. So it's probably easier to think of maybe building a mobile app. So you've got a mobile app on your phone, you've got your WordPress website, and it sucks out of WordPress just to use in a separate app. So that's what the REST API allows you to do. It's got a common language called JSON. So it's an easy format to understand as humans and for machines, which is great. It really does allow you to integrate WordPress into big data flows and custom legacy apps. You saw a lot of this work in the big media organizations 5 or 6 years ago, who made a move to WordPress. So they use systems for putting information in. Different people will type in different information. That's how you collect information, and then have a separate application for pulling that information out of WordPress to their news websites and mobile apps.
TechCrunch does? Is that the same sort of thing that they have a deal in there? Or is it
Yeah, I'm not sure those, but yes.
NASA just went headless.
Yeah, I think
What's the web NASA website?
I think the White House is as well.
Yeah.
It's definitely got WordPress in there somewhere.
Pretty popular.
So basically, this REST API now allows WordPress to be part of a bigger system rather than just standalone. All that. Here's a rough example. So if you went to your WordPress and typed in wp-json/wp/version2/post, that is an API call, and it'll show you all the posts in your website. Some things you can't do just by typing them in because it requires authentication or using a password. Things like deleting and modifying stuff, you don't want people just typing that in. But there's another couple of ways. So that's if you type it in your browser. So if you actually substitute that with your WordPress website, you'll get a list of all your posts. But programmatically, so you can use a WP remote get, the same thing, and then you'll suck all the stuff down into a variable that you can then use programmatically. Or you can use something called curl, which is the same thing. So that's programmatically getting information out. And there's lots of different endpoints. There's posts, there's pages, there's categories, there's tags, there's users, there's products, there's orders, and that's just getting the stuff out. You can also put stuff in as well. So a really powerful developer tool to extend WordPress. There's an example of top part from that particular URL. This is the JSON format, so it's easy for us to understand. It's easy for machines to understand. This is the date you're coming back from the post. So this is your first post with ID, the date, slug, status, title, all the good stuff. So you're getting all that information that you can then manipulate programmatically. That's it. Whew, that was a lot. I'm glad I had a picture of a kitten in there. So here's what we've done. We've understood the history and evolution of WordPress and Gutenberg. We've covered the server stack. We've had a look at the core database tables, the configuration file, the file folder and structure for core, how WordPress loads pages and renders it out using the template hierarchy, how WordPress uses sessions for logging and remembering who you are, a little bit about SQL because it's important because most of your data is over in the database, the template hierarchy, how WordPress chooses which file and how theme developers can then manipulate, what goes out where and when, hooks and actions and filters, how you can extend WordPress and manipulate data, how you can extend WordPress through custom post types and taxonomies, and then the REST API as well. So all that is really under the hood of WordPress. So if you were to imagine WordPress as a humming, purring car, if you open up the hood, that's this what's running underneath to make your car go, basically. Whew. And that's that. Have you got any questions? I mean, I had questions throughout our parts.
The introduction of this main changes to
Changes to?
the core WordPress section.
Yeah, absolutely. Something new comes out, WordPress core evolves. We're talking about the phases of WordPress. When phase 1 blocks, that was a huge update to core to support the block system. Then full site editing was a huge update to core to enable people to do headers and footers and all the different types. With the REST API, that was a huge update into it. It was first of all as a plugin. So they had what they call feature plugins that people tested for a while. And then, they moved that into the core. The core evolves each time you see a new thing, a new feature. So phase 3 is the real-time collaboration. The next update of WordPress, 6.5, you'll start to see some of this real-time collab stuff sneak into core, testing into there. And you'll get more of that stuff each time. Core's always evolving. It might look like a bit of a dog's breakfast sometimes in the back end, but new stuff is being refining and choosing stuff. This is how WordPress is such a big project. And there's so many people working on different aspects. You've got a user experience team, you've got a UI team, you've got an admin team, you've got a security team, you've got a block team, all these different teams, all managing somehow to come together to make this app work, which is just amazing in itself. But yeah, great question. Yeah, question. Yeah.
Yeah, so there are some conflicts between the plugins when they upgrade.
Yes.
Yeah, but there is an issue that we have to upgrade core WordPress.
Yeah.
Frequently, but when we upgrade core, we have to upgrade the plugin because they require an up version of the plugin to work compatible with the core.
Yeah.
But then we have conflicts.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we upgrade all the plugins together. So how can we solve that kind of problem?
Yeah, it's the one big thing I think that puts people off using WordPress is the conflicts when you upgrade things. It's because there's 3 different ecospheres running together. There's a WordPress core, and everyone who works on WordPress core, make sure that when they update WordPress core, it works. Okay, but then you've got plugin developers. So plugin developers are separate to WordPress team, and they're doing their own thing up there to try and make sure it's compatible. Then you've got theme developers, and they're doing their own thing to make sure their theme works with WordPress. But when we put them all 3 in the mix, then sometimes you get stuff that will hit, and that's a problem. What can you do to stop that? Nothing. As an end user, actually, it happens. A staging server or testing server. Most web hosts will offer that. So you click on something and it creates a copy of your website, then update everything, see if it works. If it does, great. Update it on the live website. That's one way of mitigating the issue. It usually only happens, when you've got a lot of plugins or some big plugins running. That's where you get the complexity. And if you've got WordPress with 2 or 3 little plugins, it's unlikely you're going to get some sort of conflict. But when you're running WooCommerce, a membership site, a subscription site, and a whole lot of handfuls, that's when you get that level of complexity that somewhere something could hit each other and conflict with each other. There's nothing we can do as website owners or developers or designers except just do more testing and be vigilant when you're updating.
Ideally, so is that possible that as a website developer, we have to get to know the core of the WooCommerce, and we develop our own plugin, develop our own theme, then there will be no conflicts at all.
That would be ideal. If you did it all yourself, that would be ideal. But it's better.
Still be conflicts.
Yeah. For example, if you updated to PHP 8.2, it could follow other things, that can affect WordPress. It's not just themes. PHP version, for example. Installing WordPress on a new VPS. If you're managing that yourself, maybe you've installed PHP, but the default libraries doesn't come with GD, image GD or something like that, and that falls over. So there's lots of different areas where WordPress can conflict. But yeah, themes and plugins are usually the biggest conflict, not actually WordPress itself. It's usually the themes and plugins that somehow bash against each other, because one plugin over here doesn't know this plugin developer over there has used the same namespace or the same function name, and you install these 2 random plugins and, you get a conflict. There's nothing much you can do about that. It'd be nice to have a conversation about how that could be resolved, but I think that's a whole different, yeah.
So when we debug this issue, we have to back up all the plugins, because each plugin has its own folder. We back up this folder, and if I activate each plugin separately, and if there is one plugin has some problem, then I back up the previous version of the plugin using this that way.
I think if you're trying to resolve the problem, that's the way to do it. I wouldn't just do that on every single update. That's a lot to do. That's why you have a staging server. You copy over, upgrade your stuff. If it falls, you go, pants, I need to figure out what it is. So if you're trying to figure out what it is, then turn the debug on, and usually that will tell you what error is being generated. It'll tell you where, like what theme or what plugin file. Otherwise, if you don't have access to that, then it's the old disable everything. Run WordPress in 2024. Does the error appear? No. Okay. Change over to your theme. Does the error appear? No. Okay. Enable plugin 1. Refresh. Enable plugin 2. Refresh. Enable plugin 3. Oh, it's fallen over. Right. It's plugin. Unfortunately, that's the only way to kind of do it at the moment. It kind of sucks, but it is what it is. And that's probably one of the most common questions I see in all the Facebook groups and things. It's, I've got this white screen of death, how can I fix it?
So we should try to use less plugins as possible.
Of course, just run WordPress. You'll be fine. Ish, unless you upgrade to PHP.
Everybody wants plugins.
Everyone.
I have a question about business side of WordPress development. Like, what do we do? We get customer who says, I want like 5 pages, product services about us, contact us.
Yeah.
I have like 20 images. Even get a nice template, and like how much they ask for? Like
how much should you quote for?
what's the average website project costing? Sydney, Australia.
Yeah, there's two camps, again, ish, for that. So people price like a fixed price, okay? That depends on their experience. It depends on their confidence. Some people like to say, oh, well, if you've got 10 pages, then it'll be 2,000. If you've got 20 pages, it'll be like, 5,000. So they go on the number of pages, or the amount of time and effort it takes them to develop it. So say 5,000 for this particular thing. There's the other camp that I'm in that do things on value. Okay, so how much value is this customer going to get out of your website design? Are you doing an e-commerce website, or are you doing like a services-based website? What's their customer lifetime value? If you do a website for someone and they've got high ticket offers and they're generating 10,000 per one lead that comes in, yeah, all of a sudden they've got like 10 leads per month coming in, so they're generating 100,000, a million a year, and you've charged them a couple of thousand for the website. So it depends. There's no good answer for that. Yeah, and there's always someone in Fiverr who will do an Amazon website for $10. Okay, always, So it's difficult. It's difficult. You just need to try and figure out, what's the sort of price point people are willing to pay. If you want to do static stuff, keep pushing. Okay, if your last project was 10,000, ask for 12, ask for 15. Next one, ask for 20. At some point, you'll get a pushback to, whoa, and then you have the conversation about, well, what's it worth to you? Where's the sticking point between 15 and 20 that's making you, not go down that route? What is it that's preventing you? And then you have a conversation. Customer lifetime value, what your products are, what the return of investment. What would it be to them if you didn't have that website for the next year or 2 years? What would they be missing out on? So that's one way to approach that from a static price point of view. The other one is what I'm getting out of it. Okay, like $1 million if I develop this for you. Okay, I'm going to charge you 100,000. In the scheme of things, 100,000 for $1 million is a pretty good return on investment. But most developers aren't in that particular camp because they don't have a confidence level or understand how to properly position themselves with value. They're not going after that type of customer. It depends on where you position yourself in the market as well. And that's what we're talking about niche. Niches.
First question, somebody says, I want a website, just say, what's your budget?
Yeah.
First question.
Yeah, don't be afraid to ask how much.
And they say, oh, I was thinking of spending $500. And then you can say, okay, well, you're not looking for me, go to File. Right? But somebody else will say, I've got 10, 20,000. So, okay, what kind of thing are you looking at? What sort of results do you need to make that a good investment? And then they'll tell you from there, and then you can kind of balance it up. So that was the best tip I was ever given. First question always when somebody says, I want a website, you say, what money do you want to spend on this website? Because what somebody is willing to spend gives you an idea. So a lot of people say, well, I don't even know. I don't know what I should spend. Then they need to go down an education cycle to decide if you want to do that. But if you just start asking that first, it helps people understand that, you get what I mean? I think it's a good question to ask.
The car dealer asks you when you walk into the yard.
Do you want pay protection? Yes.
Thing is, when you start getting client pushback, like, I don't know, then that's a different channel to go down, okay? Because they don't then understand what they want. That's another conversation. Maybe it's a paid conversation, like a discovery session that you offer them, that you sit down and say, okay, well, what is it that you want? What do you want to achieve? That shouldn't be something you do for free, If they understand what it is they want, so you get pushback straight away, then that's, okay, right, if you don't understand what you're doing, let's sit down and talk about it. Let's spend 2 hours, half a day, a couple of $1,000, and we'll sit and we'll hammer out exactly what you need.
The other related question, like some people, I have this week's website. Should I be moving to WordPress or not?
Yes.
Well, it's always yes.
Yes.
I'm going to shut it down because I know it's past. Thank you very much for bearing with me. Great questions as well. If you have any other questions, let me know on Facebook or on Meetup, or hit them up in Slack. Next one, blocks. Change it from between classic and blocks. So.
Like
Thanks very much.